Good morning to you and welcome to Penn Vicarage, and we are working our way through the Gospel of Luke, and it's good to see you this morning, and thank you so much for joining us for our Bible talk for today. Like I say, don't forget to share the messages with your friends, and other people can enjoy them over the weekend too. We're in Luke and chapter 6, and Jesus gives us a whole series this morning of what you might call quickfire parables. Jesus gave lots of stories, little illustrations, we call them parables, from life to illustrate spiritual and deep things. And he gives us about 4 or so in this morning's reading. So here goes, straight in with it. Luke's Gospel, chapter 6, I'm starting to read at verse 39. Jesus also told them a parable. Can a blind person guide a blind person? Will not both fall into a pit? A disciple is not above the teacher, but everyone who is fully qualified will be like the teacher. Why do you see the speck in your neighbour's eye, but you do not notice the log in your own eye? How can you say to your neighbour, "Friend, let me take the speck out of your own eye," when you yourself do not see the log in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the log out of your own eye, then you will be able to see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbour's eye. No good tree bears bad fruit, and nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit. For each tree is known by its own fruit. Figs are not gathered from thorns, nor are grapes picked from a bramble bush. The good person out of the good treasure of the heart produces good, and the evil person out of the evil treasure produces evil. For it's out of the abundance of the heart that the mouth speaks. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I tell you? I will show you what someone is like who comes to me, hears my words and acts on them. That one is like a man building his house, who dug deeply and laid the foundation on rock. When a flood arose and the river burst against the house, but could not shake it because it had been well built. But the one who hears and does not act is like a man who built a house without a foundation. When the river burst against it, immediately it fell, and great was the ruin of that house. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, so we've got basically 4 quickfire parables in this morning's reel. Well, so just quick comment about each of those. And at the end, I want to make a sort of generic comment why I think these are actually very special. First thing, he talks about how can a blind person lead a blind person, okay? You can kind of see the point there. And guess what it's about? It's about being careful who you listen to. And to follow Jesus and follow Jesus' way. But there's a bit interesting enough at the end about a disciple's not above the teacher, but everyone who's fully qualified will be like the teacher. And I think what this means, he's talking really about Christian leadership in the world today. That they were led by Jesus at the time, but actually if Christian people follow Jesus, then they can become like the teacher as well. So somebody once said, "I follow the message, not the man." That's not true. That isn't true at all, because actually God entrusts his word and so on to human beings. So what it's about saying here is make sure that you're following good Christian people, and good Christian people can follow you like Jesus can. So make sure, as I say, you're listening to good Christian people who are following Jesus themselves, who know what they're talking about, and make sure, like I said, you're following people that can see what's really going on and following good Christian people. That's the first thing. So that's being careful who you listen to, but to be reassured that good Christian people can lead in the way that Jesus did. Second thing, we've got this bit about specks in your eye. I mean, this is basically talking about hypocrisy and about being careful when we throw criticisms at other people to make sure we've got our own house in order, to make sure we're not saying one thing and doing another. And I think there's a very important message, not just as Christians, but also as the church. Of course, we have to speak out prophetically about what's going on in society. It's right, of course, that we have the right to say no sometimes when things are wrong in the world. It's absolutely right. We must never lose that prophetic edge to be able to speak the truth to power and speak truth to what's really going on. It is absolutely right that we speak out about moral issues, social issues, financial issues, you name it. It is absolutely right we do that. But we have to, I think what the message of this is, when we do that, as we must, we have to be very, very careful to make sure our own house is in order. That if we are talking about loving others and expecting others to be loving, that we're acting in a loving way ourselves. That we're not appearing to be saying one thing and doing another. that we're not coming across as just throwing brickbats at other people. It's about making sure that we are practicing, if you like, what we preach. And this business about specks and logs in your eyes and so on, I think that's what this is about. It's about making sure we have our own house in order before and certainly as we speak out about about others. So make sure that we're not saying one thing and doing another. That's the second thing. Third thing, this bit about good and bad fruit. I think it's interesting actually, especially in church life, where occasionally you get people who will join who are tremendously talented and tremendously gifted. And what tends to happen sometimes is they kind of come along and get tremendously excited because they're very musical, or they've got some talent that we think, oh wow, whippity, that's fantastic. But I think what this is about really is about being careful, because just because someone's talented doesn't mean that they're good. It doesn't mean they're actually on side. I've known some people who've been tremendously talented, but they've been in a church for a while and they've caused enormous trouble and division and divisiveness and that sort of stuff as well. They've let us down very quickly, before you knew, or they go off doing other things or whatever. They've left one church and joined another, and lo and behold, they can leave as quick as they come. And I've seen that many, many times. And what he's talking about, he talks about fruit, that a bad tree cannot bear good fruit, and a good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and brambles can't grow grapes and that sort of stuff. I think what he's saying here is, with people like this, is give them time. By their fruit you'll know them. And with people, the actual result of what they are will become apparent in time. So don't rush. Take your time, and be careful. Because it may be that tremendously talented people can also be tremendously talented people, and tremendously good people who can do an awful lot of good. Absolutely, amen to that. But what he's saying here, I think, he's warning, he's giving a little bit of be careful here, is that just because someone is talented, just because someone's clever, just because someone's wealthy, just because someone's musical, whatever, doesn't mean that they're right. So he's saying here, give them time. I think that's kind of really important too. And then the fourth parable is this wonderful song about wise man building his house on the rock and the foolish man on the sand, and we've all used to sing at Sunday school, butterflies, whatever. How is man built here? And you feel the song coming on, don't you? But don't worry, the weather's nice at the moment. Let's try and keep it that way. And what this is really talking about, again, it's a bit like the hypocrisy on it. What he's saying is, don't just hear the words of Jesus, but do something about them too. Don't just be hearers of the word, but be doers of the word too. And I think that's kind of really important. As I say, that we don't just hear what Jesus says, that we actually do something about it. So when we read, we're not just reading it as an intellectual exercise, not just to gather information, but we should allow the words of Jesus to enter into our heart and to change us and to allow ourselves to be challenged by them, as if Jesus is speaking them to us today. So 4 quick parables there, as I say. You've got making sure the thing about the blind leading the blind. Make sure you're listening to people that know what they're talking about, or actually following Jesus, and they can be like Jesus too. The bit about your eye and the logs and so on, it's about making sure that when we speak out about things and when we do criticise other people, as we need to sometimes, we need to make sure we've got our own house in order. We're not preaching one thing and practicing another. To make sure that we are wary, we're careful, shall we say, when people are tremendously talented, to make sure we realise that how people really are will come out in time, and it's important that we give them time, because good trees will bear good fruit, and so on, and time will tell. And finally, this business about building, where you're going to build a house, it's really about making sure that we're not just hearers of the word of Jesus, but doing something about it too. But I wanted to finish with 2 just generic points about all these, really. I think the first thing to say is this. In the church, we seem to spend an awful lot of time concerning about and talking along about issues which Jesus said very little about. I mean, the issues that the church, we seem to spend an inordinate amount of time talking about sexual ethics, when actually I see again and again and again, what does Jesus have much stronger feelings about? Jesus seems to have much stronger feelings about things like hypocrisy and doing God's word and being loving and being true and being honest, acting with integrity. Jesus seems to think much more about that. But we seem to, as a church, often to get far more wound up about things, as I say, especially these days with sexual ethics in the Western world, which Jesus had very little to say about, if at all. That's the first thing. But the fourth thing I want to say really is I like the way he does this, because Jesus clearly has a sense of humour. This business about leading the blind into a hole, or this thing about logs in your own eye. Imagine it's actually quite funny. And I think so often we have quite a heavy view of Jesus. I was brought up in the kind of 70s and 80s, and At the time, everyone used to think of, everybody used to think of Jesus of Nazareth, used to be on the television. Robert Powell's portrayal of Jesus. And he had these powerful blue eyes. And Jesus was very serious all the time. And I think that gives an example. I think we can get this idea that religion and Jesus can be very heavy and very serious all the time. What I like about this, I think these images that Jesus makes are actually quite funny. I think he's sitting down with his friend and he's having a chat. And I love the kind of the banter going on here, and the kind of there'll been some laughter when he told that story. It's quite a funny story if you think about it. Trying to get your log out every night to see the other. I mean, it's actually quite funny, and I love the idea of Jesus having a laugh with his friends. And I think it's nice actually that we ought to be able to approach our faith with a sense of humour. Now we say there's nothing worse than over serious religion. It's important that we should be able to be cheerful and have a laugh and keep things light. Often we have to discuss some pretty heavy and weighty things, but we need to be able to have a laugh too. And I'm sure Jesus was in this morning's reading. I like that, and I think we should too. With that in mind, have a lovely weekend. Do join us at church, either in Tamworth or in Penn. We'd love to see you. We'd be a better church with you in it, or join us on